have a look at the NEC, what we call NEC3. I'm looking at NEC3 because the CIDB speaks about NEC3. I haven't seen any updates in relation to the CIDB using NEC4, but I do want to tell everybody that NEC4 is out there. And again, in relation to the evolution of contracts, it has evolved, some good, some not so good, but we're going to have a look quickly at NEC3, which we call the Black Book. And this is the engineering and construction contract out of multiple contracts that NEC produces. The Black Book provides for speedy agreement of time, quality, and cost impacts of change, greater accuracy of end date forecasts, early warning of risks, and a quick dispute resolution mechanism. Out of all the contracts that we use, NEC is the kind of contract which really does their absolute best to promote collaboration between the parties, to provide for multiple instances of compensation events so that the projects can move forward, that there is a speedy resolution to disputes. I mean, if you don't have a DAB or a dispute adjudication board or something that's an ad hoc, sometimes these disputes, and we do get them, have to be referred to arbitration. They take months, if not years, to resolve. They really, how can I say, stall the movement of a project. And NEC has really looked to, and even more so in the latest version, your NEC4 contracts, really look to being able to understand that time is money. We want to do everything according to standard, spec, and quality, but we also want to move these projects forward. So it's a lot of collaboration, it's a lot of communication with your NEC contracts, and it's a lot of attempts at resolving disputes as quickly as possible for the benefit of the project. So that's what your NEC3 looks like, your engineering and construction contracts. And it is, as I've mentioned, designed to encourage collaboration and teamwork to stimulate good management. The NEC3, or let's just call it the Black Book, can be used for any sector or combination of sectors of the engineering and construction industry, can be used for civil engineering or construction. We have a project manager and a supervisor here as the agents of the employer, designed by either parties. We have multiple options in relation to, and it was mentioned before, but here you see, you can choose either the bill of quantities, a lump sum, a cost reimbursable, or even your target costs, where if there is an upside, then that is shared. And insofar as overall allocation of risks, while you have your standard basic general conditions of contract, you have what we call your secondary contract options, which are different W clauses and Z clauses that are chosen to allocate risk and to also allow for compatibility with the different types of projects that we face, because not every project is the same. And as I've said previously, sorry, would you please, sorry, my phone is ringing. I'm just going to ask my associate to please end that call. Thank you. Insofar as an overall, where it is not suitable, smaller projects would not require a contract as comprehensive as the NEC3. So that is the NEC contract. Any questions at this point on NEC3? All right, so the last contract that we're going to look at, and this is something that, a contract that obviously everybody is very familiar with, is our GCCs. I see that according to the CIDB, I think they are still referring to the 2004 GCC contract. You can see here that the latest GCC contract that we're all working with is the third edition 2015. With the main objectives of this contract to set out fair, equitable, efficient, economic, and transparent contract administrative procedures, and to allocate risks fairly and according to the party that is best able to bear them. Sorry, I see there is a hand raised.
There's a hand.
Not
Yeah, good sir. Go ahead, good sir.
Thanks, Sean. Sorry, it was just a question on, before we got to the GCC. Sorry, it was on NEC3.
Yes.
Just from your perspective and what you've seen out there, in terms of organs of state, how many out there are actually, from an administration perspective and possibly education perspective, ready to use the NEC3? Because in my history, I've only had one institution who's actually used it, and they were strict about it, and that was Public Works in Limpopo. We did that on some of the schools, but any other, I'm not sure how ready institutions are, and what do you believe it would take for organs of state, particular, to ramp up their institutions and be ready for that?
Good question. Good. So let's just take Ron's question as well, and then Adine can respond. Go ahead, Ron.
Sorry, two questions. Is it possible to address NEC4? And then the second question, before we get on to the GCC, is just the relationship between this GCC 2015 and the CIDB standard for uniformity, which I think is around 2020. Thanks. Thanks,
Ron. Go ahead, Adine.
All right, so let's go back to the first question. And yes, I've seen the NEC contract being used, not as often as your other contracts, particularly your GCCs and your JBCC. Obviously, Eskom really enjoy the NEC contract, so that's where it's being used. I think insofar as it is a good agreement and it really promotes the collaborative idea around management of the contract. The answer to your question is, when can something be used? And my feeling is when people are comfortable with it. And when are people comfortable with it? When are organizations comfortable with it? When are institutions comfortable with it? It's the same as anybody else. When you understand the contract, when you understand the basis for the contract, when you understand why this is a good contract to be used for this particular contract, where the parties to the contract understand their roles and responsibilities, that's when we can start really looking at using a particular contract, if that is something that would fit that particular bill. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, it does. Sorry, it's just leading to another one, I'm sorry, but it's also to do with the types of contractors that we'd be taking on as well, because some of them may not also be familiar with the NEC as well. Because I understand your answer in terms of, if we as employers are ready, which is very fine. I mean, obviously you can go through the whole training and get buy-in and such, but then if you're bidding and then contractors are not used to that type of contract, and we're trying to be sort of developmental in getting contractors who are sort of not the upper echelon type of contractors, would that be to our benefit too?
Very good question.
Adine, just
I see France has got his hand up, but let me just quickly answer that, and then I'm going to allow France to chat. And your point is so well made. It is not about one party understanding the contract. I hope I was really clear that for anybody to use a contract for both parties, and we've got two parties to any construction contract, if not more, is that all participants, all parties need to understand the contract, at least to the extent that it imposes obligations, rights, and responsibilities on them. So you are not going to succeed using a NEC contract or any other contract for that basis. If it's only the employer, excuse me, or the client that knows about the contracting, the risks, the roles and responsibilities, because it takes two to tango. So it would have to be a process of an active engagement in relation to training, in relation to understanding, in relation to possibly providing a little bit of information together with the tender, if you're going to tender on the basis of the contract, highlighting those things for the unsuspecting or the unassuming contractor, so that they are not caught out at the end contracting on a basis that they don't understand. Because as you've pointed out, if they're tendering on the basis of a contract that they don't understand, unfortunately for everybody, that project is doomed to fail.
Go ahead, France, quickly, and then Adine can respond to Ron's two questions.
Thank you, Sean. Yes, just briefly with regard to the type of contract being chosen, and specifically the question about the NEC. You know, it's my opinion, honest opinion, that the NEC, the FIDIC, the GCC are all inappropriate for building contracts. Now, historically, when clients embarked on projects, they called the professional team around the table and they discussed the most appropriate forms of contract, and then it was decided. Now, the sad reality that's happening today is we are seeing all forms of contract being imposed on the industry, which is not ready for all these forms of contract. You know, I've had experience in KZN where we were building schools, and the same contractor was in a very short or a very close proximity area, was implementing 3 contracts with 3 different types of contracts that he had to administer. Now, it's not only the contract, it's also the consulting team that needs to administer the implications and all of that. And it comes back to me as to, you know, you're appointing professionals to advise you on the project. Listen to them when they advise that specific contracts is more appropriate for certain regions and for certain reasons. The JBCC in the building environment has been tested in our courts extensively over many years since this was founded. It was decided upon by all the constituents of the built environment professionals as the most appropriate form of contract, and that's why all of them are co-signatories to it, except the SICP-CPMP, which was founded after the JBCC came onto board, and I've actually recently asked that they should become a signatory to that as well. So go back, listen to your consultants as to what is the most appropriate form, and please move away from inappropriate forms of contract which do not bear and protect all the parties involved. You know, the JBCC provides for subcontracts for domestic specialists selected. So your client has always got a choice as to which specialist he wants to use. Take air conditioning, take the shop fronts and windows and partitionings. None of the other contracts provide for those. Be careful. Thank you.
So we've obviously got a fan of the JBCC on board. That much is for sure. I'm also very much a fan, though. I don't think that we can say that none of the other contracts are suited for their particular for a build. I think you do have to have a look at obviously region and the nature of the contract or the project, etc. And as I've repeatedly said, these are the standard general conditions of the contract. Where the contract calls for something other than a JBCC, we need to look at the options out there, because they are out there, and they can be used for a particular purpose, and where necessary they can be modified. Now, was it to Ron's question?
So it was Ron that was just asking about NEC4, and then
NEC4, look, I mean, if we need to have a separate session, then we can look at that in relation to NEC4. We can certainly do that. Ron, I don't know if I actually am able to answer your second question in relation to, I mean, the CIDB at the moment does speak to the GCC's 2004, is that right?
Can I just tell you, if you confused, so am I. So I was trying to just understand the CIDB's GCC. And so, you know, I came across the 2015 version. But then I also came across, I think it's the 2020, there's a standard of uniformity. And to what extent it relates to, augments, maybe even supplants the GCC, I'm uncertain. And I may be mixing up terms with conditions. Possibly the one refers to terms and the other one refers to conditions. But at minimum, what I am clear about is that the 2020 standard for uniformity is a legislative requirement for construction. And so, you know, maybe we should have a separate session on the relationship between the two. Thanks for that.
Agreed.
Yeah, absolutely. Sumri, who's my senior associate, is just having a look at that uniformity, and we can certainly, maybe I can shed some light just now on that, but if that is something that needs to form the basis of a separate session, by all means. It sounds like it is something that would be highly topical.